yet across the gulf of space, minds that are to our minds, as ours is to the beasts that perish, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic, surveyed our world with envious eyes, and slowly but surely drew their plans against us. You know, I think Wells says and surely, not but surely, which is stronger. It's a much more sort of... Welcome to Skeleton Songs.
Hi, welcome to Skeleton Songs Fireside edition. As you can tell from the ambience and the grumpy cat that is probably going to shout at us halfway through this.
Wow!
No, that was Alexis.
It was me. What are we here to talk about today, Lottie Bevan?
We're here to talk about...
The Lady Afterwards. Why don't you tell me about The Lady Afterwards?
The Lady Afterwards is our new game that's coming out today when this video comes out, which is a TRPG, also known as a tabletop RPG, not tactical tabletop RPG, as some people have intimated, based on the secret histories where you created, full of hidden gods and forbidden lore and...
When I roll out, there was only role-playing games, none of this TRPG.
No, we've talked about that. We've talked about chainmail and... Yes, Chi, I know.
Well, this skeleton cat. It's a TRPG.
It's a TRPG. It's a tabletop role-playing game for up to 8 people, where you can play around the dinner table, or you can play online with your mate. And we're releasing the limited edition boxed version today.
If you have more than one mate, you can play it with them as well.
Yes, that's also possible. But yeah, so this is yours. I'm going to hand it over to you. We're going to do an unboxing.
So I had to buy a copy because I wanted to use the handouts for the last playtest of my friends. And Lottie Bevan said they were reserved for customers.
You've got to save the good stuff for the customers.
So I made myself a customer.
You did, yeah.
So we only have
99
left in the first printing.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh! It's pretty swish. Oh, there's none of the black stuff.
Beautiful. There is underneath.
Oh, but there's always black packing stuff.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting you to do that. So when you get it, if you buy one, you'll see it covered in black stuff, i.e. crinkled black paper.
Not like goo.
Not like oil or like you just put it in a bin. No, it's packing paper to make sure that nothing gets broken on the way. But for this video, we thought we'd show it to you straight away without Alexis having to dig through like a mole trying to find its parent.
I'm going to do a reading, very briefly.
Okay.
When suddenly, at midnight, you hear an invisible procession going by with exquisite voices, music.
I know.
Don't mourn your luck that's fading now. Work gone wrong, your plans all proving deceptive. Don't mourn them uselessly. As one long prepared and graced with courage, say goodbye to her, the Alexandria that is leaving. What's that from?
That is C.P. Cavafy, a very famous 20s Greek poet. And that is God Abandons Antony, one of his most beloved poems, which apparently are very difficult to translate into English, which is why a lot of English-speaking audiences have never heard of him. He wrote in a apparently very unusual dialect of Greek, and it was turned into Alexandria Leaving, I believe, by the infamous Leonard Cohen.
I prefer Notorious.
I prefer Brilliant.
Leonard don't give a fuck. It's hard to translate into English.
It's very cool.
And I loved the song long before I knew the poem, but you unearthed Cavafy when you were...
He's really magical, and I think what's particularly interesting is he's obviously got something already. He's obviously a fantastic poet. Ian Forster was a particular fan of his, which is how I found him. He was at the time a big proponent of getting Cavafy known in the West in English-speaking audiences, and I think because he can be translated in so many different ways, because his Greek does not translate easily into English, you get all these different multiple meanings from his poetry coming out, which I haven't seen before.
I had a taxi driver in the second playtest recite a poem of his about candles. When I say recite, I didn't learn it, I looked it up on the internet. And bizarrely, one of our playtesters turned out to have done for his MA or one of his many degrees, specifically specialising in Cavafy.
Who did?
Well, who do you think?
M or I?
M.
Really?
Yeah.
We can't get anything past M. He's actually, well, I don't know why I'm calling him M, because all the names of the people who have are actually in the book. Yeah. So Matt, he seems to know everything, which was great actually, because it proved that I'd done my research. But yeah, show the things.
Show the thing. So I'll start with the easier one, which is the candle. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the genesis and the purpose of each of these, and about some of the ways that they have evolved over time. This is a... Yeah, there we go. Oh, you have to buy it. There we are.
Yeah, lovely.
So, Lottie, you designed this label, didn't you?
I did. Well, sort of. It is actually a version of a contemporary French stamp. So... Smell
this.
It smells beautiful. It smells of black opium. It smells of coffee. It smells of vanilla. It is meant to affect the scent of this very particular bloom that I won't talk about in too much detail because it's a bit of a spoiler, that has some sort of connection to an important place in the game that again I can't talk about.
I mean, the name is written on the label.
Okay, it's about the seraphim, but we're not going to tell you what the flower is, so you still have to play the game.
Lottie came in one morning with 6 different candles and she said, which of these smells most like the seraphim?
I did.
And I gave you the best answer I could.
Well, it was revenge for you constantly telling me that as the resident artist I have to draw invisible and impossible colours.
That's
so,
true.
Fair.
So the ink's real.
So yeah, this is a nice candle that is meant to evoke the sense of the seraphim while you're playing your game with your friends. What's next?
What's next? So the mechanic I think I like most in the game, because it's one of the few bits I contributed, is the regard of the hours.
Thanks.
I just have a particular partiality as opposed to all the brilliant work you've done.
That's
But they're my
sad, is it?
I say a lot of things.
Yeah.
The regard of the hours, so as you know, I mean if you're watching this, I don't know why you wouldn't know this, the hours in the secret histories are the gods which watch the world, and I nearly gave us indeed all that. We wanted a reroll system. We wanted the reroll system to feel in keeping, so we baked the reroll system into which hours are scrutinising your group in which session. It's rather like the influencers mechanic in Cultist, at least spiritually. And we place dice on the hours.
So do you want to get the dice out as well? This is relevant for talking about. It's called the Regard of the Hours, and it is actually a very beautiful design from Alexis. So well done him, I suppose. He's all right at his job. And we have given every member who buys a Lady Upwards box 2 different dice sets. You can see orange and purple, which fundamentally represent the bright arts and the night arts, which I'm sure AK can talk about separately in a moment. But one of these sets, you can choose which one you prefer, will go on some of the cards that you pull from this deck that AK is helpfully not showing to the camera because he's on his phone.
I was looking up a name that we had forgotten that we needed to check.
Okay. I'll keep talking. Ignore that. So each of you get one of these beautiful red velvet bags with 2 different dice sets in. One of the dice sets will be put on a variety of cards in the game, which will show a number of the hours that you happen to pull or that you choose if you're the GR and you want to pick a particular set of gods to look after your players. Another set will be used by players to actually play the game. And depending on what cards you pick, they will have different influences over different parts of the game. So for example, if you picked the Linesmith, I think was your example, you might be able to have a number of re-rolls for some kind of combat-orientated situations, although the Lady Afterwards is not particularly combat-orientated. But equally, if you pick something like the Elegias, you might get a lot of re-rolls for things that have something to do with death or memory or cemeteries or I don't know, something
I think we got
Elegiasty.
through the playtest with one person getting stabbed, one person getting punched, and one person putting their own eye out in a moment of enthusiasm.
Yes, that was unfortunate.
Yeah. But the thing is, one of the challenges of designing this has been trying to cater for people who know a little bit about Cultist Simulator, or a lot, or nothing at all.
The police are coming.
And it's the Suppression Bureau. And obviously, different people have different ideas about the significance of the hours. So we're really clear in the rules. If you have the Witch and Sister in the regard, and you've got dice on the Witch and Sister, then you don't need to know all the attributions of the Witch and Sister. You just justify it by saying there's water around here, or there's a lady here, or it's under moonlight if it's something on the card. It's generally fairly easy to draw a connection. That's what we want. It's more interesting to do things than not to do things.
Well, and it's designed so if you don't want to use the deck that we provide, you can use the full Tarot of the Hours if you want, which is available on our Etsy shop, or you can use any tarot deck that you prefer. It's not a limited thing, and the idea is that you look at the cards. Obviously, tarot is interpretive anyway, and all the different tarot decks will have vastly different interpretations of the different cards. So you take a look visually at what's on the card, and then you make a decision about what you think that card reflects. So it can be totally up to you what you read into it.
And this is one of the things that we wanted to provide for people who had bought the game and wanted something that the Lady Afterwards wanted something extra. We also didn't want people to feel like chumps if they'd already bought a Tarot of the Hours. And of course, we wrote the system so you can just use the standard tarot and use the attributions from that as well. And what we settled on doing is, first of all, you almost certainly can't tell with the camera. but this is not the same as the normal Tower of the Hours in size. It's a mini one.
It is a mini one, yeah. So it is, I think, I can't remember, A7-ish. It's a very unusual size, and it really is meant to be a sort of pocket deck. So it doesn't include any minor arcana, it just includes the major arcana. So there are 23 cards in here, ranging from 0 the Moth to 23 the Mare in the Tree. But like we said, it doesn't have to only have 23, because I think you start with 3, certainly. And then you can add or take away cards. But we're getting into the weeds.
But what I was going to say is the light's tricky. Beautifully designed.
They're not good for showing off merchandise, which is a flaw in our plan.
Well, what you can see is the printers. And if you played Cultist Simulator, you'll have heard of Cater and Hero. But Lottie, as ever, put a great deal of work into the design. This is obviously, as you know, because you're of course an aficionado of the decadent era at the end of the 19th century, inspired by the Yellow Book. But Cater and Hero is from Cultist. Arbitre des Perles. Lottie said what could be a law-relevant name for a printer in Cairo, and I went away and dug deep and found this whole glorious story about basically the first queen of Cairo, who came to a terrible end, as often happened to women in medieval interregna, but her name in the original Arabic means Tree of Pearls.
I had forgotten that.
Nothing is ever forgotten. Not even. Right, these. Do you want to take a couple?
It's quite a lot. There are 8 of these in every box.
Lottie wanted to touch some of the familiar notes from Cultist. So the 8 characters, the 8 pre-gen characters and Lady Afterwards, are all named after roles in the game, DLC and otherwise. Now they're not the same as the actual characters, because having the DLC Cultist Simulator Dancer spend 3 days in a city in the company of the DLC Cultist Simulator Exile would be a recipe is the word I'm looking for trouble. So she took those as jumping off points to flesh out the characters. I think it did a great job. But the badges, I'm going to be honest, I thought this would be a little bit more gimmicky than it is, but they're really gorgeous items.
There's one
they
that's
really
open, if you can find it.
Lend a sense of ceremony to it. And when you have a group of people starting a session, if you've ever been in a TRPG, you'll remember it's unexpectedly hard to remember what the names of the 5, 6, 7, 8 people around you are in character. You spend a lot of time saying, what was your name again? And actually having badges, it was more of a...
One of the key
here
things,
we are.
There we go. So this is the detective one. This is the first one we made. I like this one particularly.
It's better right way up there.
So one of the key ideas behind the Lady Afterwards as a whole game was I really wanted to make a TRPG for people who hadn't necessarily played a TRPG before. So a lot of things came as necessary parts of the design once we decided that. One, I wanted to make sure that in the box there was everything you needed. You didn't need to add anything else. So for example, I think most people who play TRPGs tend to have at least one dice set, a 7 dice RPG set. But a lot of people who have never played TRPGs before won't. So I wanted to make sure that we provided that. Same with these badges. I wanted to make sure that when people opened up this box of what I hope is wonder and joy, some people might be daunted by seeing so many bits and pieces, not really know where to start, and you say pick your character and you say I don't really know the difference and does it matter, and they all have different skills, is one better than the other. Whereas if you have 8 different coloured badges, all of which are unique and different, have a small bit of flavour text on them, people can literally just pick their favourite colour, or they can pick their favourite job title if they think, oh, I feel a bit like a detective, or I feel a bit like a dancer, or I quite fancy role-playing an exile, whatever it is. There's a really basic way that you can immediately get into the game without worrying too much about stats or figures, although of course you can do that too if you want, but there's an option for people who maybe are less confident with the genre to just get stuck in immediately and get going.
We actually ran, I can't think of it, 4 playtest sessions. Lottie ran one with a group of her friends.
Yep.
And then we retooled it significantly. And then we went back with a group of my friends, and then we retooled it after each session less significantly. But I remember you printed out the badge designs on card, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
You got people to choose them.
Yeah.
And you're right, it was exactly...
Well, it's just, so we talked a lot about board games. So I'm not a big board game fan. I find them quite like stressful, honestly, not threatening, which is what I was going to say, but stressful.
Thousands well, literally dozens of people hearing you and gasping.
But it's true, I'm not saying they're bad. I just personally find them a bit stressful because you open up the box and I think what you're meant to see is, look at all the fun counters and look at all this and let me dive into the systems. And what I see is, I don't know what this is or how to play it, and it's going to take me at least an hour to get to grips with it, and honestly I just wanted to hang out with my friends. So I didn't want that effect. I didn't want it to feel like a board game, and actually we talked about including a few more things in the box, like counters that might help with the mechanics, but we decided against that because it got a bit too bitty and it did just feel like a board game, which was not what we wanted. We wanted more kind of murder mystery, have dinner with your mates, have a conversation and play a bit of Cultist Simulator in the real world. That was the effect we were going for.
One of the things that struck me, so I started playing RPGs in, holy mother of God, 79, 80, and did for about another 20 years, and then stopped when I started trying to make games for a living, because I realised that all the creative energy that I was putting into GMing usually ended up there rather than making stuff. And since I was trying to make games in my spare time initially, that wasn't happening. So I was 10-year drought. It was really nice to get back on the horse again, as it were. But I'm surprised how many traditions just sort of got ossified relatively early on and haven't changed. Some of them are there for a really good reason. Some of them less so, and so where we could, we tried to break up some of the ossification without doing anything radical or menacing.
Yeah, we wanted it to be TRPGs as you know and love them, but not TRPGs that you need someone who's played TRPGs for a decade to explain to you before you know what the hell's going on. And I think we managed that, honestly.
I think so. I think you were very used to them from me, because obviously, as is so often, our relationship was, I would say, but what if? And you'd be like, that would cost another £11, or people wouldn't understand it.
Yeah.
Or remember this is supposed to be for range of.
Yeah.
And the playtests were really useful actually in thrashing a lot of those out, because I found that some of the ideas that I thought would work beautifully, people didn't notice or care about, or were just rubbish.
It was really interesting to see what people continued to focus on and what they really didn't care about.
Let's talk about the map though, because that is something that I think benefited most from playtesting.
What's this?
Where is the Lady Afterwards set, Lottie Bevan?
It's set in Alexandria in Egypt in the 1920s. And I realised that nobody really knows anything about Alexandria, which is kind of stupid of me because I didn't know anything about Alexandria until I decided to set the game here.
Got a library.
Well,
he said he doesn't, of course. But that's the one thing everyone knows about Alexandria, is it used to have a library.
Which then was destroyed.
Which then was destroyed. Probably not by the Arabs in the 5th century. Or I was taught that as history growing up, but it seems to have been less dramatic than that. And it survived, oddly enough, in the Museum of the Serapeum. But, well, the relics of it. Anyway, but talk about Alexandria, I'm interrupting you.
So Alexandria, for those of you who don't know, maybe everyone knows, is a coastal city. It's called the Bride of the Mediterranean. It's very beautiful, actually, in lots of ways. It's a very odd city because it has all these genuinely ancient ruins, but it's been lived in for centuries and centuries. So it has a sort of detritus of beautiful, amazing relics upon which modern people live. And in the 20s, it became a bit of a hub culturally. There were lots and lots of different nationalities from the East and the West, all living together on top of each other. It was quite politically complicated. As you can tell, we're British, and the British, once again, did not behave themselves terribly well. We actually went over and kind of owned Egypt for a bit, which we shouldn't have done. And the 1920s in Alexandria was a kind of political hotbed. We don't tell you specifically what year this is in the Lady Afterwards. 1920, exactly. But in 1919, there was a big revolution by the Egyptians to oust the British. In 1921, the British reluctantly signed an agreement saying they'd give independence back to Egypt. But we still maintained a presence there because we kind of didn't really want to give it back. So it's all really complicated and interesting, and it's by this beautiful sea, and it's full of all these kind of different cultures all being together and fizzing about.
It's really, I didn't dig into it nearly as deeply as you, but there's a real flavour to it that
there is a flavour.
Starts to manifest, and I think bits of it come across in the game. It's hard through the whole thing. You know, Tangier or Algier also calls itself the Bride of the Mediterranean, I think.
Looks like they're going to have
the Mediterranean's a bit of a rake.
It is a rake. I mean, it is a rake. It is beautiful. So, in order to give people an idea of what it actually was like, we've included not just a map, although the map is a genuine early 20th century map that we have slightly modulated, but we also have, you're going to keep showing? We also have a bunch of genuine 1920s photos from the time, showing a number of genuine activities and also genuine landscapes that you might see.
Which came in later, didn't it?
They did come in later. I was going to say as part of a playtesting outcome, we realised that people really didn't find it easy to visualise the city, because I think a lot of, we're originally going to set it in London, everyone kind of knows what London was like, although of course you don't, but you have
It looks like it
a
does in
decent
that
idea.
Sherlock Holmes film that Hollywood made.
Yeah, it looks like Sherlock Holmes, it's fine, whatever. But Alexandria was a bit more kind of alien for lots of people. So we put in a bunch of photos on the actual map. We blew the map up from an A4 size to an A3 size to make it a bit more exciting. And
not just a bit exciting, that was one of the things that came out of playtesting, because with the first playtest version was very similar without the pictures around the outside. And we had an A4 sheet in the middle of the table, and the flow of the game, which is Lottie's idea and works beautifully, is that basically at breakfast every morning the players decide where they're going to go in the city.
Breakfast is very important. Put that in.
Is there a quote about that?
There are 3 quotes about that actually, which tell you quite a lot about my favourite books and literature, but I'm not going to tell you what they are. You've got to read it.
And so you put this thing in the middle of the table, and people didn't address themselves to it.
No.
So first, I think after the first session,
surprised.
We made a point of we talked it over and said, basically I have to put my hand on it and say, this is your tool, decide where you're going to go.
Yeah, we asked the game runner to really make the players engage with the map. It's not meant to be something that you occasionally refer to or just there because some people like maps. It's really meant to be the kind of heart of the game. You're meant to be looking at it, you're meant to be planning strategically where you're going. It's not a timed or stressful game, because I hate timed and stressful games, but it is a game where you can't necessarily visit everywhere on the map. So we want players...
technically timed.
But not in the way that you would think.
Not an hourglass.
It's not
limited time each day.
Well, exactly, but that's the thing. So you have a certain limited stay in Alexandria, so you can choose where you're going to go. But I think that's important, because you wouldn't want people visiting everything, because then you kind of lose the magic or exhausting exploration, right? You want people to feel like, oh, I wish I could go there, but I can't. I'm going to have to be quick here and move on to something else, because that's much more exciting than I've spent literally a month looking at this hallway, and I'm pretty certain there's no hidden thing. It's a great hallway. But you were saying about the map.
I was. So the next session I put the map in the middle and I was like, this is your thing. And still, first of all, an A4 piece of paper with 6 people craning around it in the middle of a table, especially because our session, like a lot of others, I suspect, was candlelit. It's quite hard to make out. And so we went back and Lottie did a bunch of mojo with like the typeface and the graphic design to make it more legible, which I didn't understand.
What's it called? Making it bigger.
Oh, is that what it was? Oh.
Yes, but it's a secret. I'm a very skilled graphic designer. So
and then we talked about it and blew it up to A3. So there is a production cost for these things, and an A3 bit of stiff card with a ribbon around it is, not a lot more, but it
has a lot more presence. Yeah,
it's a lot more presence, and we really found when you put an A3 map in the middle of the table, people pay attention, and it became a ceremonial thing again.
Well, I think
and in fact,
the pictures, yeah.
Well, that's the thing. So I remember when I said let's blow it up to A3, you were wary, because you said this is based on an old map, and if we blow it up that big, people start to notice whatever the real world equivalent of pixels are.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really simple but I think interesting problem, right? Because with the lady afterwards, we normally make digital games. If you played Cultist Simulator, you know what a video game is, right? But with a physical box like this, you have to take into a bunch of real problems when you make design changes. So for example, we could say actually it's really important that we get a zebra in the box, in which case we need to suddenly get a different kind of box. We need to think about different shipping costs, and we need to think about, is the zebra going to eat all the paper if we send it in the same parcels? Maybe we need 2 different parcels. This is actually kind of real world problems you have to solve if you change design tack, whereas in Cultist Simulator it's all encapsulated in the code, right? So I'm not saying it's easy, but it is just a different set of problems. So with the change from A4 to A3, it sounds like a really small, boring admin issue, but realistically we had this old map. It wasn't the right size for A3. We couldn't blow it up without it obviously looking kind of digitalized and a bit crap. So we had to come up with a slightly more intelligent way of getting this map to fit an A3 page while looking good, and we came up with the idea of actually centering the map only slightly enlarged in the center, and having around it the sort of halo of real-world photographs from Alexandria itself, which I think turned out brilliant.
I think it did, and I think this is one of the things about design again and again is often you're moving the pane around. You find that if one bit's more difficult, there's another bit that's less difficult, but often you can use 2 constraints to cancel each other out. And I think we would never have thought of putting the pictures around the map. Obvious though it sounds now, had we not had the constraint of we need something with presence, but we can't blow up our existing asset, which is already much addressed in order to fit it. Hello. We're going to show you something that doesn't exist because I threw it away.
Yes.
But you'll have one in your box. So I mentioned I bought a box, and the box contains 3 tiny bonus things, which I didn't keep, attractively printed though they were, because they weren't any use to me. So the first one, you have to use your mind's eye here, is a 10% off token for
The Etsy merch shop.
Yes.
So for a whole year.
For a whole year.
So anybody who buys a limited edition Lady Afterwards gets 10% off all merch from Weather Factory for the entire year, which I think is pretty jazzy.
Second one is a Steam key, which we couldn't have shown you anyway, because we probably want to make use of that Steam key.
You get a free copy of Cultist Simulator.
Because presumably at least one person in your group will not have played Cultist Simulator.
I mean, it's shocking, I know, but sometimes you find people in the world who have not played our tiny indie game about moving cards around and dying.
Is that what it's about? Moving cards around?
Yeah.
That's what life's about, though, really, isn't it?
You see, you're busy, you don't resist.
I mean, comes life in the game. And the third one is Lottie's curated playlist.
It's actually a square.
Alexandria
so you know
Music.
being inaccurate with your
QR code.
Yes, it's a QR code because we're stuck in the early noughties and we're still using QR codes. But yeah, it allows you to use a specially made 1920s music playlist to set the tone. If you like, you can play whatever you like. If you don't, but that is available to you if you buy the Lady Afterwards.
But now the core.
That's the one.
The core of it. So this is obviously the meat of it.
Yeah.
And do you want to say what these 2 books are, Lottie Bevan?
The orange one.
Oh.
Yeah.
Having a moment.
Yeah. Orange one first is the Secret Histories rulebook, which is, I think, mostly Alexis Kennedy's brain in a book, which usually we don't do.
There's
now
not
you
the
confuse
book
the camera.
being printed.
The camera's all unable to
so
deal with anything. There we go. So the Secret Histories rulebook is the kind of real meat and bones of the whole game. It's the game system, it's the mechanics, it's how you make characters. That is so unhelpful, but it's good because we don't want spoilers. It's how combat works, it's how perils work.
It's pre-gen characters.
There's a chapter in there called Creating Your Character.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
Creating characters.
She's telling the truth. Yeah.
It's almost like I made this game.
Yeah, you did, didn't you? Sorry.
But ignore him. But yeah, so this is the real core of the whole system, and hopefully if we see people are excited by the Lady Afterwards, we may make more scenarios in the future which will still use the Secret Histories rulebook, but set a game in a different place than Alexandria and have a different plot.
Anise is trying to score points in a conversation at a cocktail party about an obscure author. She has widely read 40 and her rival has widely read 30. She rolls 39, her rival rolls 29. These are both successes, so it's a tie break. Her rival scores points with a reference she can't match. If she rolled a 33, she'd have come up with a reference to an unpublished version of the text. It's a D-handle system for those of you who are TRPG aficionados. Rather than go with the sort of critical and football thing standard, we went with doubles under your skill are astonishing successes, doubles over your skill, astonishing failures. I can't believe we're the only people to use this system. I'm sure I must have seen something with it out there somewhere.
But we think that you made it up.
Well, no, I don't. I just logically can't believe I did. So please consider me to have credited whoever might have thought of it beforehand. But mathematically, it's pretty much the same as 0 1 to 0 5, let alone 1/10 of your stat. But it's a bit easier for people to notice and recognise. And we did actually have a player who really struggles with numbers in our session.
We did.
Who found
slightly
it more useful.
dyscalculic. Yeah.
So that was a.
And we were saying when we were in the depth, and by we I actually mean you, in the depths of the real basic systems right at the start of this design, that the more maths a player has to do, the less fun the system usually is. There are people out there who really love complicated maths and people out there who really love systems, but most players are too busy thinking about what can I do with this bozo who's trying to lamp me around the head with a stick. Or did we pick up all the clues that we could have got in the last place we were, rather than thinking about, what is this sum and have I got the right number and is that over or under the number that I need to get, bearing in mind all the different kind of modulators that are going on around it.
Conversely, it's an article of faith in some parts of the scene that rules are basically a thing imposed by bad people. And if you are coming to a TRPG for the first time, then rules, I think, would be really useful guardrails. So you try to provide a guardrail without providing lead boots.
Well, I think you put it very well in, I think there's a section of the rulebook which talks about combat and, or perils martial, as we have termed it. And in it, I think you say, firstly, Lady Afterwards is not a combat-orientated game. This is not D&D. We're not fighting everything we see every time we see it. if you are fighting, the idea is that you're normal humans, possibly with some occult knowledge, and therefore fights are really a good idea. They don't tend to end well. But you say at the start of that, I believe, that it's important to have rules to make it clear to everybody how the system works, so people don't feel it's unfair when they decide to try and attack somebody and the game runner says, oh, well, it didn't work, because how can you arbitrate between that, right? But if you have a rule that says if you roll an even number, then you win, and roll an odd number, then you lose, then even though that's a very simple system, at least everyone knows where they stand, and no one's going to say, oh, the game runner got it wrong. Everyone's going to say, fine, I rolled an even, I won, hooray. So your rules are slightly more complicated than that. But the idea is that you've provided enough rules, or we have provided enough rules, that people will be able to determine equally and fairly what has happened, and people won't get cross, but not so many rules that the combat is kind of mired in this slow system of everybody checking a long list of tables and numbers every time anything happens. The idea is that it's very quick and hopefully feels quite natural, but you have this kind of skeleton of numbers and systems behind it to make it actually work.
Again, I'm always going to worry when you say this, that we're like, but our game doesn't have rules, man. Obviously, this is
rules.
Yeah, it has rules, and the idea of rules-like games has been rules-like games have been around for 30 years or more. But we've tried to hit the sweet spot. Example of combat: Freddie, second trombonist for the London Symphony Orchestra, is rehearsing for the magic flute when a cheetah inexplicably falls into the orchestra pit immediately next to him, and that's our example of combat.
I think you're going to read the whole thing.
No, it's I mean, the man who wrote it is brilliant, but it's based on a historical incident, isn't it?
It is. I thought it doesn't matter what I thought you were going to say. Yes, so it turns out that in the 20s, cheetahs were kind of the thing to have. They were what like all these rich people had, because it was kind of the height of luxury, it was the height of exoticism, which was a real thing at the time, which is partly why Alexandria had so many Europeans in it, because suddenly everyone was like, hang on, we can get like a plane to somewhere, and like trains go across the world now, so we can actually go exploring and see new worlds. And Josephine Baker, who is a singer and dancer that I particularly love. She was just starting her career in the 20s, but she's more famous in the kind of 30s and 40s. She was rising to prominence, became very popular, and she famously had a cheetah called Chiquita that she would keep on, I believe, a diamond collar and leash.
I don't think it was called Chiquita.
I think it's called Chiquita. And quite frequently it would sit on stage with her while she was performing, and often get bored and just leap into the orchestra pit and terrorise all the musicians, who did not find it funny, although apparently all the audience found it hilarious, as did Josephine Baker. I don't believe it killed anybody, but yeah, so we've actually taken a real 20s event, which happened apparently every Wednesday, and put it in our book.
I like this tiny thing, but I really like these little fellas.
Cultist Simulator players will recognise them.
Success, failure, astonishing success, dreadful failure. The rules that in earlier drafts just said astonishing success, dreadful failure in bold. Lottie, with a graphic designer's eye, looked at it and immediately said, we can make this more interesting. And also,
you see, you're giving me more credit than I do, actually. You said we needed icons, and I grudgingly said, I have to change the design then. Well, and then we did. So it's a good mix.
With this note here that says, this is not a realistic system and not medical advice for the injuries and recovery system. If someone kicks you in the head, for God's sake, go to a hospital. Yeah. Which is only partly so we don't get sued, but mostly just because I've written a lot of combat systems in my time, and you always end up struggling with the edge cases. You want a system, ideally, where somebody conceivably can be shot and die immediately, because that's what happens, but also where most times bullets fly, people are not shot and die immediately. Similarly, if somebody is injured, you don't want it to feel outrageously inconvenient. You don't want to prevent people doing things, but you also want it to have weight and heft. So again, like everything else, you try to strike a middle ground. We try to strike a middle ground, a middle bell.
We hit that ground right in the mid.
You want to talk about the purple book? What you can't see actually, but you can feel,
velvet touch,
is the soft touch thing.
Yeah, so I've got a bit. I do all our merch generally, so I am fairly well versed in print, particularly. We do a lot of paper products. And there's a really nice effect called Velvet Touch, where you get this really sort of tactile, soft effect. So we've gone for that. And I've noticed, I was looking at a bunch of TRPG shops, seeing how other people were presenting their TRPGs, and there really is a style. And for those of you who play TRPGs, you know the one I mean. They tend to have a sort of band of adventurers on the cover, and then a big sort of title with a logo on the front. And for those who maybe are not TRPG aficionados, basically think of anything you saw in like Stranger Things. There's a real kind of set aesthetic to the front of TRPG books, and ours are again meant to be historically accurate. They're meant to look genuinely like 1920s notebooks. So hopefully the minimalism will come across as cool and pretty, rather than just like we didn't have the budget of Chaosium, because we don't have the budget of Chaosium, but shh.
I want to have an opinion about design actually at this point.
Oh God.
No.
Graphic design.
No, game design.
Oh, that's allowed.
So you can see here is a set of bullet points for describing the Arab graveyard. I think the Arab graveyard, which is relevant at one point. And in Lottie's first draft, I believe you had paragraphs of text which would be read to the player, which has been the case in a great many scenarios over the years. And I would like to suggest to you that if you're writing a scenario and you're doing a block of text that is read to a group of players, and you put down your fucking keyboard right now and you think about what you're doing.
Step away from the screen.
Because I have never been in a role-playing session where the GM reads out a block of text and everyone listens. It's one of these ossified practices I was talking about earlier that people decide are a good thing at the beginning, and
then don't question.
Even if it's superbly written, it's not usually the best way to do it. I mean, he's given them a freaking handout so they can read it at their own pace and skip over it. People fidget, people look at their watches. Something written for the page is rarely written for performance, and the things you see in scenarios are usually written for the page. And there's a real pacing problem where if you start reading an imaginary conversation, an imaginary description.
Of what?
The graveyard.
It's flat and dusty, and the sun is shining, and there's a little bunny.
Oh, hang on, I thought
and
it was
then
night.
Oh, no, it is. I meant it's shining with moon.
I'm going to catch the bunny!
Oh, yeah, the bunny. Oh, shit.
So this is the thing, an RPG is generally a call response format. The GM says, the GR, I'm sorry, says things.
Yeah, thank you.
And then
You've made some feminist changes.
And you could be game mistress or game moderator. Game moderator was popular briefly in the mid-90s, I think.
No, that's nerd. Yeah. Denied.
But as soon as you get the GR holding the stage, then people start to switch off, because the whole point about RPG is that you contribute back.
Yeah.
And if you give the GR a set of bullet points that they can use to weave into their own descriptions, so that you can say, it's flat, it's dusty, look around, there's a little bunny, then it becomes much more natural correspondence format. So
You're right.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry I made you change it.
No, you're right. And if I didn't believe you, which I did, the way that the game opens and actually ends is with a bit of a montage where players all read a very small section of one particular artifact to set the scene or to end it. And we discovered that, firstly, a lot of players are really nervous about reading. I mean, everyone who played it is totally literate, there wasn't any problem there, but when you're suddenly asked in front of a group of people, especially if you don't know them that well, to read something, a lot of people feel under pressure. You know, do you need to act? Do you need to do voices? What happens if you stumble? Are you going to sound stupid? What happens if you drool? So that seems to be a bit of a social concern for some people, but equally it's very boring for everyone else who has to listen if what they're listening to is paragraphs long, because as AK just said, you know, everyone's there to participate and play, like, you know, one of those fun ball games where everyone has a turn all the time. You don't have to sit and wait, you know, for 5 people to go past before you can do anything again, which are less interesting. So in the montage sequences, we actually do what probably everyone who's watching this did in school when they were about 8, which is an English class. Everyone has to read like a line from the book or read a bit from the book, and then if one person in the class was reading the whole chapter, everyone else would switch off, they wouldn't care. But if you know that your turn is coming next, or you know that it's only a short bit, people's attention doesn't wander as much. So yeah. So
this is a really good place to talk about, because this was a significant design thing. The idea of doing a sort of montage bit in games, I would like specifically to credit to Mr. Dave Morris, noted game book and RPG designer of the 80s and 90s, I guess. I mean, he's still around now, the 80s and 90s when he made his bones, who used a suggestion for a different technique in the much beloved Dragon Warriors, which I took 30 years to get around to adapting. But initially, in the very first session, one of the things we retooled was, we tell the players, you've all got this relevant letter from somebody, you've all met on the train because you've all been summoned to Alexandria to do a thing. Here you are at the station, what do you want to do next? And it's a very abrupt opening. It's the sort of natural equivalent of you've all met in a bar because you've all read the wanted poster. And we immediately started looking, having seen it fall a bit flat to begin with, for ways to let people gel and role play a bit before we thrust them out into the desert sun of Alexandria and say, get a taxi. So we originally, I think, were going to have a customs officer on the train and open there so they could do a bit of role play. But it's still, especially if you're new to role playing, very menacing to have a character sheet thrust into your hand and then be told to to start role-playing. So what we did, I think we should talk about the character sheets now.
Well, we haven't finished the Purple Book. We haven't said anything useful about the Purple Book at all. The key thing is the Purple Book is literally the main bit of the game.
We'll come back to the montage a bit later.
So in the Purple Book, in the Game Runner's Guide,
the Purple Book,
also known as the Purple Book, there is the whole scenario. There's a lot of lore. So the Orange Book, the rule book, that's very player friendly. You don't have to be the game runner to read the rule book. There's no spoilers. It's all fine. In the Purple Book, it's basically full of spoilers. So only the game runner should be reading it. It will tell you. It has a glossary of useful terms in the back. It has all your NPCs. I think there's over 25 main NPCs that, of course, you can make up your own. There's a host of different places you can visit. There's a lot of descriptions of combat and people you can have unfortunate interactions with.
Are there lots of descriptions of combat?
There's lots of descriptions of potential combat,
Fair.
But not lots.
Well, because you've always been quite violent. But one of the brilliant things Lottie did, I'm going to show it without giving any spoilers.
You can share a bit of spoilers, that's fine.
Fine. So we've got this gentleman in this photograph.
I think we call these NPC cards or character cards. I can't remember specifically the term we settled on.
It's taken hours to come up with that. But you notice he's got a photo, he's got some bullet points, he's got a bar underneath that says negative to positive, and he's got notes. We didn't, in the end, put stats for most of the NPCs because obviously it's traditional. Again, it's one of those things that ossified. But if it's not a combat-centric thing, or if you're not engaging any sort of opposed interaction with them, then you don't usually need the stats. If they need to, the GM can make them up. It's the appearance and the context that's important. So the negative to positive bar. We put in there just because we realised that I'm really pleased with it, and it's again something we had a discussion between the graphic designer and the game designer.
So we realised that basically throughout the game you'll be exploring different places, and places are relatively easy to evince, right? You go into the cathedral and it's got stained glass and there's a priest and it's full of choral music and it's all very nice and people can kind of visualize it. But what people struggle with more, I think, is creating the characters that are realistic for the time and people you might meet. And of course, most people's experiences of a place are not just physical locations, they're actually people that you meet who have different life experiences and have different kind of ways of living and different things to say about the world. So NPCs are really important. So we put NPCs in, but initially in the first couple of rounds of Lady Afterwards design, they were just kind of names and we gave them a sort of brief description and that was kind of that. But again, because it's not just the 1920s that we're asking people to get into and imagine, it's 1920s in Egypt, which a lot of people don't have experience with at all. A lot of people found the NPCs particularly challenging. So to fix that, we did a number of things. One, we put in a bunch of pictures. So I spent quite a lot of time finding...
When we say we mean Lottie.
I spent quite a lot of time finding actual 1920s photos, some of whom have little fun cameos of relevant people that you may or may not recognise. Some of whom are just genuine people from the 20s who have managed to find in a good enough resolution to use in the book. We put in some basic bullet point information. So this is going back...
I think you was going to say about the pictures, two things. We with the assumptions the GM will use them as a focal point to be able to describe them. Because if you show them to players, you end up doing this sort of thing. But it's just it's easier than saying they've got brown eyes and a prominent nose.
And I think people will draw assumptions from a photograph in lots of different ways because they'll remind you of a friend you once had, they'll remind you of an enemy you might have had, they'll make you think of one particular thing, they'll make you think of another thing. So when one of your players unhelpfully asks for more information than we have given in the Game Runner's book, because of course we can't give all the literal information about everything, otherwise the book would just be infinite. The game runner has a much higher chance of being able to come up with something on their own that they think fits this character without worrying about, am I saying something that's gonna be a problem later down the line? Am I making this up and being too free with it? Because if you have genuinely an actual face and someone says, does this person look like, I don't know, they're older or younger than 45, then I haven't put that information necessarily in, but you can immediately draw inferences from the image. So it's actually quite a powerful way of empowering the game runner, I hope.
The negative positive thing we realised from the basic practicality of running sessions 2 to 3 weeks apart is I couldn't frickin' remember every conversation with other players. Obviously take notes, especially if you're not me. But it's easy to lose track of sort of where things were left. So we went through a number of iterations of finding ways for the GM to be able to write in the book quickly, just mark sort of basically, did they come away from this police officer with the police officer thinking they're a dick, or having managed to charm him.
Yeah.
And which is this positive negative line. You don't record much information, but if you put a notch halfway and positive,
Well, and
then it just gives you enough of a thing for your memory to hang on.
I mean, originally
Really
in a first version, we were thinking of checkboxes, which would be sort of friend, foe, or neutral, but we felt that was too limiting. There'd be lots of instances where you don't really feel that an NPC has become any of those things, and it's quite boring just to tick neutral. It doesn't really tell you anything. But just the simple visual quality of a line, and you can say it's really close to the negative end or it's really close to the positive. It should be quite helpful for the game runner future down the line. And we've also given you space to make a couple of notes as the game runner. So if something specific happens, if they form a particular rapport with somebody, or if they really decide they dislike somebody, or if halfway through the conversation, I don't know, that something explodes and they have some trauma about that, and the next time somebody lights a candle, they're liable to shriek and run out of the room. That sort of information, I think, is not going to be kept in the game runner's head for weeks until they play another session. So it's really important to write down and remind ourselves. So yeah, I'm quite pleased with the NPC cards, even though again it seems like a really small design
It took
change.
so much time for Lottie to dig up all those photos. It's surprisingly difficult, especially because there are much fewer photographs in the 1920s than today. If you went to like Getty Images now, you can find whoever you like, but not in the 1920s. Of course, the majority have been lost in the last 100 years. On top of that, there's always the risk that if you want to pick somebody, a lot of the photos that still exist, you know what I'm saying? A lot of the photos that still exist are of actors or actresses. So, you know, they might actually be recognisable to anybody who knows anything about the period, which would be distracting. But also, I believe you accidentally put in a face and found it was one of the architects of the Armenian genocide.
Yeah, I nearly
Which has got us banned in Turkey for naming it.
nearly put his face in, and then I thought, I'll just Google him to make sure I've got the name right, and then it turned out it was like this famous architect of a genocide, and I thought, I'm not quite sure I want him as like the nice taxi man in the second part of the adventure. I was going to say one other thing about the photos. It's not just difficult to find 1920s photos, and it's not just difficult to find 1920s photos that are a nice resolution and not the face of somebody who committed genocide, but it's really difficult to find 1920s photos, sadly, of people who are not white. So this is set in Egypt, so I'm assuming that most of our players will probably come from the West, and there obviously were a lot of Europeans around at the time, but we definitely wanted a lot of native Egyptians, and we wanted a lot of other nationalities, and it's very difficult to find high quality photos of people who basically weren't rich and basically from England, as far as I can tell. Lots of Americans, but we managed it, so hooray.
You managed it.
But it took a while.
I want to talk about the character sheets. These are, to my mind, the best part of the game, which isn't something I'm used to. I think so. I think they're the most...
I enjoyed making them.
I mean, you know, pound for pound, right? There's just a lot more of this, but this does a lot with the little, and I think they benefit more than anything from the iterations.
I think it was the first thing we did.
I only just noticed this thing, by the way. Let's see if I can get it focused. Here we go. There's a tiny disclaimer underneath the bright arts and the night arts in the occult section. The Suppression Bureau, which I think you put in without mentioning it to me.
Maybe.
I approve. I like
Maybe.
it.
So these are designed very much around actual 20s forms, particularly British forms. So they all look a bit funny. They have different typography than you might expect. The margins are different. None of you will probably care about this stuff, but I hope that it all contributes to the sense that you actually are engaging with something that is from the 1920s rather than sort of something I've printed off on Word doc, which it very much is not. Every character, remember there are 8 of them, all have a distinct personalised character sheet. They're all different and unique. Everybody has a bunch of different starting stats, although of course you can customise your character as you like. All the rules are in, I believe, the Orange Book. You all start with a certain amount of money. Some people have more than others. Unfortunately, people like the aspirant and the dancer, I think, are particularly poor. People like the bright young thing, obviously, has lots of daddy's money, so that's fine, and they're pretty well off. You have a bunch of basic possessions, which we've used to help round characters out. And all of the information we've put on this character sheet that we've put in there for you, that we don't ask you to fill in yourself, is about hopefully pushing people in slightly more interesting directions than they might initially think of. One of the things we tried to fix was the fear of the blank page. Lots of people maybe get a character sheet that's totally blank and they think, I don't know where to start, I don't know what to call myself, I don't know what personality I want to have. It's really stressful. Whereas if you give somebody kind of a half-filled form and then say you can customize it in this really easy way, hopefully that gets rid of this the kind of panic that sets in for some people, but still allows you to end up with a really unique character that you feel you have created, and that is totally kind of your person to play as. So to that end, on the flip side of every character sheet, which I'm sure Alexis will show you now? My beautiful assistant. Great, yes. On the back of every character sheet, there is a unique personality quiz specific to every different character.
The dancer. Your father is A, a ringmaster, B, a painter, C, a revolutionary, D, insolvent. Which are you?
Ringmaster, please.
Your mother is A circus acrobat, B, an actress, C, addicted to opium, D, used in church pamphlets as a cautionary tale.
I think C, because I watched Deadwood and I always liked the opium addicted widow and her tragic story. But yeah, so the idea is that it's, actually some of it does have mechanical implications for the story, but that's spoilers. I'm not going to tell you what those are. But most of the character sheets is about just encouraging people to do slightly unusual things, not just saying I'm a big strong man who's really good at punching people, or I am a beautiful lady who's really good at seducing people.
I think it's worth talking about the skills though, because we
put a lot of work into the skills.
Again, they went through a lot of iterating. So this started out being what's the Cosium system called?
The BRP system?
Yeah,
The
because
basic
we just all might as well
system.
plug into that. But it ended up mutating so much it wasn't really worth making the connection. Nothing against Cosium, who do amazing work, but we wanted to customise it. And the initial skill list, like a lot of skill lists, was a sort of laundry bag of everything, including like philately and zoology and perform musical instrument and knife brackets short, knife brackets long, knife brackets quite long, drive car, drive ship, drive plane.
Because
no, I'm exaggerating, but there was this.
But specifically, it's kind of an interesting point. So because we set out and we knew that we didn't want to have this as a fighty game, you know, we knew that combat was not going to be the centre of it. We wanted people to actually play real people, not I am a retired army general who's got a sort of absolute marksman-like ability to shoot from 1,000 feet away. But basically, I don't know, I'm a 40-something mother of 3 who's got a spoon and a baby, and that's how I start this game. Because of that, we wanted to put in initially, I certainly wanted to put in like as many different skills as I could think of to make it as possible to make as many different characters as anyone could want. And Alexis rightly came in and said, number 1, this is very stressful and confusing because there's so many points. Number 2, how many of those skills is actually going to be realistically useful in the scenario that you have written? Because realistically, I don't know, the ability to make an atomic bomb, firstly, is not accurate in the 1920s, and secondly, is not.
But I think planes was the one I particularly made a point about. It's quite unlikely anybody was actually going to be. I mean, we didn't have any people with a pilot career and the opportunity to play planes. We were trying to strike a balance between writing a system that we can use for future projects and something that should be useful, and focusing people on the skills they're going to be useful in the game. But also there's always this temptation, again, I've written some skill systems and I have used some skill systems, and you can see, or sometimes you are the person that, I should put in pilot anyway. What if somebody wants to be a pilot? I put in pilot. Now I should put in pilots brackets boat, because that's a different set of skills. We can't not put in the system. And the thing is, if it's a crunchy system where there are lots of specific rules for using skills, you need that list. But the vast majority of skill lists I've written, there's an air of desperation about. And they'll say things like photography. This is the ability to use a camera.
Yeah, I did a lot of that.
A movie camera, or I guess like also a small camera. Fishing. This is the ability to catch fish in both fresh and oceanic water.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, you need to put it down. You feel you need to write something, and if you feel you need to fill a gap, then maybe don't put the gap there in the first place. That sounded really mean, and again, I'm sounding mean because I'm being mean to my past self, who did exactly that. I remember in a previous skill system when I was very young, writing with my then co-writer something on the lines of photography. This is the ability to take photographs. I sit here alone in this dark little cell and I write skill definitions, and they hurt me, and I have to hear. Long. But maybe it would have been a better joke if we just hadn't put the long list of useless things in.
But again, particularly because bringing this back to the original design of the whole Lady Arthur, we really wanted to make a game for people who weren't necessarily super confident playing TRPGs. And if you present somebody who's never played a TRPG before with an entire A4 side of paper that has tiny little checkboxes on it and say you have to pick 5 of these and that's going to be how you basically play the rest of this game, again, that's quite a stressful experience for lots of people. They don't really enjoy it because which one of those 1,000 skills is going to be most useful, and maybe they pick the wrong one, and maybe they'll be stupid and all this kind of stuff. So we did a lot of work once you pointed out everything that you've just said, which is sadly true, and I certainly felt very embarrassed once you pointed it out that I'd done literally all of these mistakes. We streamlined the skills as much as possible. So I think you still have something like 30 skills. You know, you're not limited to 5 or something, but they don't come across as overwhelming. Every single one of those skills feels realistic, but is also probably going to be useful at some point in the actual scenario that we've written. So nothing there is kind of dross, but it does allow people to customize to a really significant degree their particular character, especially based on the fact that everyone is starting from a different character type anyway. You know, if you start as the aspirant, sort of lonely, impoverished, but very clever kind of bookworm character, you're probably going to lean towards a certain number of skill sets that you feel fleshes out the character that you've already been given. Then if you play as the medium, a sort of possibly fraudulent, but very popular spiritualist, when you might want to focus on other things. So I think that the mix of these two systems together actually does do a lot with much less than you would feel.
I think so. And the other thing we did, because obviously Call of Cthulhu is a big influence in this, just as Lovecraft
Call of Cthulhu.
Cultist, but it's quite a distant influence, although a big one.
Yeah.
And if you've ever played Call of Cthulhu, the 3 skills I guess used most often are
spot hidden, library use, and I don't know what the third one's going to be. Fast talk. Yeah.
I mean, your mileage may vary, but most people who played Call of Cthulhu will be, right? So we basically. We had to turn the washing machine off. So we basically took fast talk, library use, and spot hidden out because it is boiling around the same thing all the time. It forces people to optimise off it. Anyway, we did leave an intelligence skill in the game, so you've got a basic fallback to roll intelligence stats, so you can do basic fallback to roll perception on. But what we've explicitly said is you don't roll perception, you roll whatever the skill is that's most relevant or most useful. If you are trying to find the relevant rare herb, you roll your horticulture. If you're trying to work out which way the car went off the cliff, you roll your drive. Because only trained detectives and a few others have a perception stat. Most of us use whatever skills we have to hand. And it means, more importantly, that it's a role-playing decision where it forces you to think, it encourages you to think about the character, to think, what's the skill that's most useful to this room? I'm going to try to use my stagecraft to think if there was a trapdoor, where would it be, whatever. We do actually have a detective in the game, of course. He's got a detectiving skill.
One of the no, he doesn't have a detectiving skill. But one of the early mistakes that I made was we swapped around a bunch of major stats. You know, like I can't remember what specifically.
I think we took perception out and put determination in. Or something.
So we swapped a bunch of things around. Unfortunately, what this meant was in our first playthrough, the detective, he obviously should be a character that you would expect to be quite good at detective activities like noticing meaningful evidence on a crime scene, was literally the worst in the entire group at being able to see anything of note, because basically he had a particular number that was attached to something that had been swapped around and we hadn't sort of extrapolated it out into the actual mechanical system. So we have fixed that now. The detective is now not useless at being a detective, but that was a problem for a bit.
Similarly, and a lot of systems actually do this well in a variety of ways. You break down social skills into categories and encourage people to choose a particular approach that might be relevant to the situation, rather than just rolling a persuade or a fast talk. And what we went with was negotiate for that sort of hard-nosed dealing. Bamboozle, which is close to fast talk, the con man skill, but specifically the con man skill rather than just make up a story.
Let me guess, where is it?
Blend, which is the skill of fitting into a party or not being apparent on the streets, they're just fitting away.
So are you looking for definitions of these? Because in the Orange Book, we have them.
But what I was going to do was end that by asking you about allure, because Lottie was quite keen that we didn't have a comeliness or a beauty or a charisma or an appeal stat, that we had allure as a skill.
So I know I think this was the thing I pushed back on most when you gave me your initial design feedback, because basically I say yes to everything because you're basically really good at game design. But allure, I felt quite powerfully that we really needed it. So I'm a feminist, but also I just think you don't get that many women designers in particularly the TRPG scene. I'm sure everyone is saying, well, what about this person? And of course there are lots of women, but I think usually it's men designing it, and often that means that kind of physical beauty and the kind of feminine assumptions that we make that women should be good at things and should dress a certain way and should look a certain way are not as considered. I think you pointed out the fact that Intimidate is a really classic TRPG skill that hadn't ever crossed my mind because I'm just not a very aggressive person, so it never sort of occurred to me when I was designing this scenario or its characters that somebody would kind of want to have as a really primary facet of their character the ability to kind of muscle on in and be all like, hey, do what I say. And equally, allure is about using beauty, which I think can be a weapon. And I don't mean about, seducing somebody. I don't mean about painting your makeup particularly nicely. And I don't mean this is limited to women. Anybody can do it. I think there's a hell of a lot of men out there who know exactly how good looking they are and know how to leverage that to get what they want. So again, I don't want it to be a cynical skill. I don't want to say anything nasty about human nature or anything like that, but I do think that physical appearance and the confidence in one's own skin actually is quite a powerful tool for social interactions, and I haven't seen that leveraged in an actual mechanical way before in a TRPG. So I wanted to have something that reflected beauty and confidence and all that kind of stuff, but wasn't explicitly a sort of sexy skill, because I know often you get things like allure in vampire fiction, which is either a kind of effect of the vampire basically being really sexy and you kind of want to do what they tell you to, or you get glamour, which is kind of using a vampire magic to encourage people to behave in a certain way. And I didn't want to necessarily have a sexual overtone, although of course you can play allure as a sexual mechanic if you like. But yeah, I just felt like it was something I hadn't seen before and it definitely needed to go in.
And again, I think it's worth saying I've seen sort of different flavoured social skills next to each other, a lot of character sheets over the years. But I think making allure explicitly a skill rather than a physical thing was new to me, and I think the flavours of choice that we elected in the end are quite a nice fit for the citrusy vibe. It's coming up to an hour, so I'll do a quick flash of the old handouts, but only a quick one, but it's massive spoilers.
Yeah, but you've got to show them in the beautiful period appropriate envelope. Look at the string, everyone. Look at how important. No one cares, but I think it's really important. This is what happens if you're making a physical box for several months in your life. You're like, but look at the way that this cardboard has been finished.
When we showed all the stuff on the table when people came in, was it? Taz actually said something like it's also high end.
Yeah,
so it does. I mean, we're not even trying to sell you at this point. If you've watched an hour of this video, you've already paid to buy it, or you're just really like our sofa. But so I can't show you most of these for obvious reasons. I will show you this.
No.
That's why you recognise it.
Honestly.
Do you want to talk about this?
We can. So this, as most people will have recognised, is a tarot card. Now this is not a tarot from the mini deck that we provide you, and this is not a tarot from any of the decks that we sell, but it is possible to find this at a particular point in the game, and the reverse side, the card face, will tell you something about the situation, but we're not going to show you it because we don't want to spoiler. But there are 18 handouts that you can get. We call them artifacts. You don't have to find all of them. You're not expected to find all of them. It doesn't make a difference to your ability necessarily to piece together what's going on in the story. Although, well, it will certainly help, but the key thing is that it's not the only avenue for you to find things out about the plot of the lady afterwards, if you're finding these things. So I know that in early playtesting, one of the bits of feedback we got was that people felt when they got a handout, they'd sort of done something right, and it was sort of like, yes, tick, you get a mark there, good job, here's your present. And we didn't really want to feel like if people didn't find handouts that they felt they'd failed in some way. So the handouts are really nice. I hope that you find lots of them, but you don't need to. They're all just kind of little bonuses that help you flesh out the world a bit more.
Apart from the tarot card, which is vital.
Well, there are a couple of things in it that are quite significant. I'm not going to lie. But you can talk to people and get some information too. Or your game runner can take pity on you and say, look over there in the box. And then you'll have it.
Montage. You play music. You go station by station. People read a paragraph of the letter, and then you move on to Berlin or Istanbul or Zagreb or wherever. And then by the time we read the last paragraph, with pauses to pick up on some of the character sheet questionnaires and the way. I think we did one question after every paragraph. People share one thing about themselves.
Usually from the character questionnaire.
From the character questionnaire specifically, that's just come out from the garage. And then I am, and I think this is generally one of the things that has that's broken free of the ossification in the RPG design I've seen over the last 20 years, is more of an emphasis on ceremony, because there are people who just have a good time with whatever format, especially if they're a group of close-knit friends. But a ceremony provides you with a way to establish a mood or to give people a little bit of freedom, but a little bit of latitude, but a lot of specificity in what they're supposed to be doing, which again, especially with folk who are relatively new to it, it's that guide rail. Yeah, but I made everyone swear an oath at one point.
I mean, that.
One of the characters made the character swear an oath.
To be clear.
Yeah, but I had them all
actually repeat it
because you can lose your nerve halfway through and you get somebody to say the oath and then you go around the table and say, I'll say it too. Yeah, I'll say it. Yeah, what he said. And it doesn't have anything like the resonance. It becomes a thing. And I think again, if you make a group of players repeat in character this oath not to share a secret, then in character they will feel constrained in a way they wouldn't otherwise. The lady afterwards.
I do love that we have made an entire new game, a TRPG, set in your world of magic and the occult, peeling back the skin of the world, of apocalypse and yearning. And I think the one thing we haven't talked at all about is magic. So I think it's just worth saying, well, we don't say magic because you hate the term, because you hate fun, but occultism
I do hate fun.
And adeptry. There is a lot of that in the afterwards. If you play Cultist Simulator, I hope it will feel like the same world that you know and love, but it's transmuted for people in the real world to engage with off a screen. But we particularly wanted people to play characters that were not in total command of spells and summonings and understanding of the mantis and the world beneath the skin of the world. We wanted people to be fairly early on in their journey because we really didn't want it to be a stage where characters are summoning up gigantic kraken or performing complicated rituals to have some sort of complicated magical effect, or dreaming and going necessarily very far into the mantis itself. We wanted it to be a fairly introductory sense of the occult, but there is very much a whole system dedicated to how occult things work.
It's quite a minimal system before we get the lorehounds too excited.
Okay.
In future projects,
but just I wanted to make it clear that you can actually do occult things in this game, and occult things can definitely happen to you, even though we've talked entirely about non-occult things for whole of this.
For this and for future projects, a lot of there's a perennial problem in TRPGs, which is making sure that everybody feels relevant. And in traditional D&D, I mean Dawn Times D&D, low-level party, if you're a magician, a magic user, the term was back then, you fire your one sleep spell and then you just poking people with your dagger for the rest of the adventure. And there's an archetypical problem that's sort of gone on through phases where playing Ars Magica, the people who are playing Magi are really having the most fun. The people who are playing the companions honestly aren't really as much. Vampire, basically everyone needs to be a vampire or something, or they don't feel relevant. Anything where people are magically gifted, basically everyone needs to be magically gifted, or you end up with late season Buffy, where a lot of people are hanging around because they're beloved characters and trying to find things to do. And one of the things that we've tried to do in the Secret Histories always is to make the magic something you also do.
You said the M word.
Yeah, I did.
Absolve
me. Yeah.
It's to make the magic something that you also
do. I
see.
Yeah.
I see. Well, because one of the things that we both hate are, or we find very frustrating, I should say, are when plots end in somebody basically doing a big spell. Often mechanically that's very boring because it's quite unclear about actually how the spell functions. It's more just the fact that you did it and then you win. Narratively, it's not super interesting either because it's basically just the person who had the biggest spell.
And to be clear,
wins.
Given that all the major victories of Cultist end with somebody basically doing a big spell, it's not the existence of the big spell, it's the fact that a bunch of threads play out and then somebody does a ritual.
Yes.
If it's a payoff, if it's the Memesian surprising but inevitable thing,
powerful magic is great, but the idea of somebody doing just one particular act right at the end that just ties everything up neatly is a bit disappointing.
I agree.
Right, well, that is our unboxing and our chatting about the lady afterwards. You hopefully are watching this on launch night, which is today on Thursday the 21st.
We're watching after launch night. Hello, future!
But yeah, you can buy this on Etsy. Do you want to show the box? Beautiful. This is what you want to buy. It's got all the fun things in it. We've tried really hard. We're quite proud of it, and we think that you'll really enjoy it. So thank you for being here with our candles. I'm better go feed the cats.
Yes, thank you cats for being mostly quiet for this whole thing. Have a spooky evening.